Hello, it's Tracy Kiernan, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint Jolly Mrs. Claus with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. I'm going to first go over the materials that we'll be using for this painting. There are only two brushes required for this, so the number 12 bright brush and the number 4 round brush. As far as colors, Hooker's Green Hue, Cadmium Red Medium, Light Pink. These are the Liquitex Basics colors, but use whatever colors you have available. Gold is optional, so in the background there's some shimmers of gold in there, which is kind of fun. Raw Sienna, Mars Black, Titanium White, and Light Blue Permanent, which is not pictured. There is a template for this, so I will be using the template for this. You basically just print this out, 2 sheets, place a piece of graphite paper underneath, and then press with the pencil to trace the lines onto your canvas. So that makes things super easy and stress-free. You don't have to do the drawing of this. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So I have an 11 by 14 inch canvas. I've already transferred my design to the canvas. I'm actually going to adjust these leaves to make them more like holly leaves. So I'm just doing these little webbed lines in there. You can do the same, or you can keep them as the simple leaves. But again, this is really simple. You just print out the template on 2 sheets. You place the graphite paper below it. So the graphite paper is this, if you've never used it before, it's fairly inexpensive. It's like a gray colored sheet of carbon paper, and you press with a regular pencil and your lines transfer to the canvas. If you're doing this as a paint party, some people like to retrace the lines with a Sharpie so it shows through the first layers of paint. I found in this that if my lines are pretty dark because I pressed firm with the pencil, and they ended up kind of showing throughout the painting where I can kind of see where certain lines are. And in the end, you can't see any lines because we're going to be doing multiple layers of painting on this. And then I'm going to load my paint palette with raw sienna, gold, and titanium white, and we'll be using the number 12 bright brush for this. And I'll be using the number 12 bright brush. So this brush is a Royal and Langnickel Majestic brush. It says number 12 bright on the brush. And a common question I get about this is, I was at the store and I found a 12 bright and it's not this size. So mine is a 1/2 inch wide by a little bit over a 1/2 inch long. So find something, if it's labeled 1/2 inch flat brush, that works, or just something similar. You don't have to use this exact size. But that's how big the brush is that I use. And I'm going to go ahead and start painting around Mrs. Claus. I'm going to double load my brush in raw sienna and titanium white. As I'm going along, grab little bits of gold in there. The gold's not going to show up right away. It does show up better when you do it as kind of like a final over the paint color look. But I'm just going to grab all 3 of those colors and kind of work my background, different angled paint strokes. I want sort of a darker color along the edges. There's not a lot of edges because the Mrs. Claus takes up most of the canvas here, but towards the ends, I'm doing a little bit more dark. And then towards Mrs. Claus, I'm going to do a little bit more light. So adding that kind of lighter color around her, it's going to help with our contrast later. I'm going to give her like this kind of glowing effect around her, and then darker on the edges. And if you accidentally go over those lines, that's okay. You may have to, especially for some of those smaller areas, because acrylic paint will be able to paint over it and not see any background color that ended up over her. So more raw sienna on this corner area. We have a bunch of space up here, so I'm going to make this a little bit darker and then blend it to be lighter as I get towards her. And if you wanted to do a different background color, you can. I almost did light blue for her background, but decided to, I've been using a lot of blue lately, which I usually end up doing a lot of blue in most of my paintings. So I try to force myself to try new colors, and I thought this pretty gold color would look nice for Mrs. Claus. You might realize that the gold doesn't show up shimmery at first. It works best more as like a final layer. We can still use it to blend our colors in, but it looks best when you layer it on top of your colors, and then you'll get that kind of shimmery effect in the end where it's not mixed in with the other colors. Sometimes I like to use leftover paint on my palette to just go ahead and paint the edges of the canvas if you're working on a stretched canvas. So I'm just dragging mostly that darker color on the sides and then just kind of dragging it back on the edges to create more of that kind of darker framed effect on the background. Right now I'm rinsing my brush and I'm going to go back with just my gold. So I mentioned this earlier that the gold doesn't really show up unless we do this. So this, and my colors aren't exactly dry, but this is still working. I'm layering on just the gold in kind of thick layers in various spots around the background and just kind of angled splotches in there. And that'll give you more of that metallic effect in the background. So you can kind of, it's harder to see on camera, I kind of move the canvas a little bit, you can kind of see it shimmer. We don't need to wait for this to dry before going on to the next step, but I would recommend being careful not to smudge your background when you're doing this. So I am going to paint her face, or the first layer of her face next. And I'm going to use the color Light Pink, Raw Sienna, and Titanium White, and a number 4 round brush. So I'm going to get the brush wet and kind of squeeze out the excess water. I'm going to mix on my palette about equal parts pink and raw sienna, and I'm going to gradually introduce some titanium white to lighten that color. Add a little bit more pink in there. So I would say a little bit more pink than raw sienna and almost equal parts white. And then I'm going to take this color and just kind of outline the shape of her face, chin. I'm going to grab a little bit more white in there. And then just start painting the face. Kind of go in the direction of the shape. A little bit of water to help with the flow of the brush, a little bit more white and pink. We're going to have to go over her nose and eyes and cheeks. But I will say that I was still able to see those lines through this layer when I do the eyes, nose, mouth. I was still able to see that later on. And then just kind of paint everything in. So you're going to notice with my painting style that I like to mix my color, but then I like to get different variations of that color. So as I'm reloading my brush, I'll add maybe a little bit more white to the brush and kind of blend it a little bit, or maybe a little bit of that darker, the raw sienna, and blend it more, a little bit more pink and blend it more. I like to do that because it creates color variations so it doesn't look like just one solid color everywhere. And I like to blend it right on the canvas. We have some areas on the head where we need to apply some shadowing, specifically up here under her hair. So the hair would be creating some shadowing on the top of the head here. So I'm going to take my darker color, which is that raw sienna, and I'm going to do this before this dries so that I can easily blend it in. So at the very top of her head where the hair parts, you want to blend in just the raw sienna so it's darker and just kind of blend it into the rest of the top of her head. Another shadowy part are the ears, and you need to do a little bit more of that raw sienna where the ears are. So that's what I did there. I grabbed more raw sienna and kind of blended it into the rest of the head. And then our other shadowy part is under her chin, so her neck. That needs to be a couple shades darker than her chin and bottom cheek area. So I took my base color that I've been working with on my palette and just added little bits of raw sienna in there to darken that color. So everything under here is going to be a little bit darker. I'm going to go back over the chin and bottom cheek area just to kind of re-outline that edging. So I am mixing my lighter color back with the white and the pink and the little bit of raw sienna. I'm just going to take this and just kind of go over the edging of those bump lines where her chin and cheeks are. And that's it for the first layer of the face. We're going to let everything dry before we do anything else. And I'm going to load my palette with the color Cadmium Red Medium Hue. I'm going to use the number 12 bright brush, and I'm going to paint her hat next. you don't have this exact red, you can use a different red. You can also use a different brush for this. You don't have to use this brush. You can use the round brush if that's easier for you. I'm just going to fill the hat in, and I'll also show you how you can do a little bit of shading on this so it's not just the solid red. I'm going to use the edge of my brush to kind of really get in there, outline the edge of that hat. Our background should be almost dry. If you're noticing it's starting to like mesh with the background or the colors bleeding into it, you may want to just go ahead and wait for your background to dry before doing this. And then it's going to be a little bit tricky to go around those holly leaves. I'm just going to do this, go around the negative space. If it's easier for you to just paint over the leaves and then paint the leaves over the red when it dries, you can do it that way. Before the red in her hat dries, we're going to do a little bit of shadowing, and I'm going to use green as the shadow color. So when we mix a little bit of green into red, we get a nice kind of neutral shadow color. So I'm going to take Hooker's Green Hue and load that onto my palette. I still have red on my brush. I'm just going to grab a teeny bit of green and mix that off to the side with red, and you're going to see that it kind of gives you this really pretty kind of darker red that you can use for your shadow color. So I'm going to apply this in anywhere on the hat where there might be some shadowing. So around our holly leaves, we'll have some shadowing. Above the white part of the hat, there's a little bit of shadow. So pretty much the whole bottom part of that hat and around your holly leaves. And it just kind of blends in with the rest of the red. Then we're going to paint her shirt. So same thing, I'm using just the red now, but I didn't rinse the brush, it didn't need to. So I'm using the edge to outline the edging of her shirt, and we shouldn't have any canvas, so if there's any background color that's gone over that part, you want to go over it with the red. I'm going to switch back to the number 4 round brush just because we have a lot of smaller kind of curved and weird angles to fill in here. So I'm going to go around her sleeve, mitten area, and then around the rolling pin. We will be doing that shadow thing here too, but I want to just paint everything solid red first before adding shadows. So I'm going to add shadows right now actually before this dries. So shadows, we just grab teeny tiny bits of green and blend that in where you think the shadows would be. So they would be behind the rolling pin. This whole area actually right here would be more of a shadowy color. Close to her apron would be shadowy. There'd be more red kind of in the middle of this. And then back to red over here. So you can do it both ways. You can fill everything in solid red and then go back and blend your shadows in. But I'm doing it as I go with each little section before the red dries so I can still utilize the wet paint for blending. So behind the star cookie and around kind of the collar of her shirt would be shadowy. All of this over here behind the star cookie would be more of that darker red shadow color. And then it just blends to our brighter red in other areas. And then we have the area under her collar, above her apron. Just going back in and making sure everything is filled in. We can go over parts of the rolling pin if needed. You can go over parts of the cookie if needed. Add a little bit more shadowing in this area around the rolling pin. And then over here, under her collar, this would also be kind of more of that shadowy red color. I am going to paint the leaves of the holly next, so I'm going to rinse and use the Hooker's Green Hue and the round brush still, outline the shape and fill it in solid. After that first layer dries, we should be able to layer on lighter greens and do some highlight and shadowing, but we'll let that dry. Before doing that, I'm going to start painting her apron in. So her apron is a lighter green. So I'm mixing white and the Hooker's Green Hue about equal parts, and we'll do different variations of this for shadowing. But the base color is that white and green. And then you want to do shadowing around her mitten and towards the bottom. So more of the darker green around the mitten. And towards the bottom. And because this is a big area, the direction of the paint strokes, I'm kind of making them kind of go around the objects, and then for the most part, everything's kind of going left and right, but you can be kind of fun and expressive with this if you want to make kind of different angled paint strokes. And I'm just taking that light green and just kind of blending it with our shadow colors that go behind behind the cookie. And if you want to change the color of the apron, you can. I'll do snowflake patterning on this later after it dries, but if you want to do like fun gingerbread patterns or something else, you're definitely welcome to get creative with this. I'm making this part of the apron a little bit darker, and this part up here a little bit darker as well. Next, we're going to work on her hair. So we need Mars Black and Titanium White for this to create the gray color. I'm going to start with a darker gray color and layer on lighter colors. So get my Mars Black and Titanium White, and I'm using the number 4 round brush. So I'm going to take white, black, mix about 2 parts white to 1 part black. So not a super dark gray, more of a medium gray. I'm going to start applying this under the hat. So this is going to be the darker part where the shadowy part of her hair will be because it's under the hat. I'm just going to follow that line. And then grab some more white. And this is going to blend with that gray to make it more of kind of a lighter gray, and just kind of go with the direction of that curve and go all the way to the edging where the hair is. And you're going to notice how fun that looks because we already created shadow there. So it's already going to look like the hair is having some shadow on her head. So I'm going to take this and go around. So you just want to go in the direction of that shape so it curves around the ears. And we already have kind of these different variations of gray in there to create kind of this texture in her hair. I'm going to do the same thing on the left side. So take the white, blend that in with the gray. Bring this down. And so I'm not trying to blend it all the same color. I want some variation in there of darks and lights, and that's going to start creating that texture in her hair. I think a little bit more black for around her ear in this area. Make that a little bit more shadowy. And it's just blending right onto the canvas. And do the same thing over here. I kind of like how that looks. I'm going to get a little bit more black. When you mix that black with the white, you only want teeny tiny bits of black on your brush so it doesn't go too dark. But if it does go too dark, we can let that dry and layer on lighter grays later. And then we're going to go around the rolling pin. I'm going to grab titanium white and just do a few kind of lighter strands in there. So when this dries, we can layer on lighter color and that'll create more texturing in her hair. What I'm going to do next is rinse the brush, and I'm going to do a little bit more layering on her face, which is completely optional. If you like the way the face is, you don't want to mess with it, you don't have to. But I'm going to touch up this area where her chin is. So I'm mixing white with that raw sienna and the light pink, just a little bit lighter version of what I used earlier. I'm going to layer this just where the chin is. It's a lot lighter than the first layer, and I'm actually going to use my finger to kind of blend this up. A little bit over here on the edge of her face and kind of blend it up. Around closer to the cheeks and kind of blend it up. And then right here. So the direction of my paint strokes kind of go in this kind of oval shape of her head. I don't want to mess with the shadowing towards her hair. A little bit kind of in the middle, and just kind of use my finger to blend. So I'm not covering all of the first layer of the face. I'm going to get a little bit more raw sienna and just kind of do a second coat where her ear is, so her ears are darker. Just kind of use my finger to kind of blend that in, and I'm going to do a little bit of a lighter layer on the neck and just kind of use my finger to kind of blend that. Next, I'm going to do her nose. So I'm going to take this base color. So it's the same color that we used just now for the head, and add a little bit of red to it. So it's going to make it more of this kind of rosy color. So that entire oval shape, I am still able to see the lines, the original lines. It's not really showing up on the camera, but I can see them. If you need to kind of redraw the face to help you, you can do it that way or retrace it as needed. But the oval is pretty much right in the center of her face. And then I'm going to use that same color for the cheeks, but I'm going to use my finger to do this because I need this to be very, very light and not super opaque like the nose. So I'm not using the brush, I'm using my fingers. I'm just going to take that rosy pink color that we made and just form the cheeks inside of that circle. So only little tiny bits of that color on your finger is needed. I forgot to mention her head actually is slightly tilted. If you notice, the ear on the left is just slightly higher than the ear on the right, and same with the cheek, that both kind of go a little bit at an angle. If you did it completely horizontal, that's fine. I was just following how my template looked. So that's why one cheek's a little bit higher than the other. And my round brush, I'm painting her eyebrows. So I'm able to see where those eyebrow lines are. If you want to redraw them, you can before painting them in. It's thicker on the left on this particular eyebrow, and then it goes thinner on the right, opposite over here. And you're just using white with a teeny tiny bit of black in it. So it's kind of a really light gray color. And I'm going to wait until the face is dry before working on the eyes and mouth. And I'm going to load my palette with some fresh titanium white next and do the hat. So for the most part, this is going to be all white. However, I'm going to blend a little bit of light gray into that, so it's not exactly pure white. I want to make sure this entire shape is defined, so any background color or hair or red from the hat, this is all above that. The only thing that's above this white piece is the holly leaf. Everything else should be above. I'm going to go around the berries. If it's easy, just paint over the berries and then we can just paint some simple circles over that later. And there will be shadowing in this. We can do texturing on this hat later, but for now I'm just doing smooth paint strokes to get it all filled in. And then I'm going to do this part of the hat. So I'm going to get a teeny bit of black in there actually to get some gray layering on this. And when this dries, I can add some lighter layers above it, and that'll create some fun texture and three-dimensional effects. And then I'm going to take that light gray and just kind of blend this in here and also do some shadowing. So around the berries, we would have more of that gray shadow color. You would use my finger to blend that out. And around the holly leaves, or behind those, we would have some shadow color as well. Next, I'm going to use the color Light Blue Permanent for her mittens and the number 4 round brush. So this is actually not the Liquitex Basics version, it's the Artist Loft, which is very similar. I was out of the Liquitex Basics Light Blue Permanent. And I'm going to use the round brush. So I'm going to just paint her mitten. So the drawing part of this has the kind of scalloped edging on her mittens. I'm actually going to change that here. I'm going to make it a smooth edging instead of scalloped, and you'll see what I mean here in just a second. So all of this shape I'm painting in, and then when I get to the edging, I will paint it solid instead of kind of that wavy shape. This one as well. And we'll do some shading for this too. I'll just use Mars Black as my shadow color for this. So this right here is just going to be solid. So it looks more like an oven mitt rather than gloves. And if you wanted to change that, and maybe she's just wearing gloves and she's got that kind of scalloped sleeve, you can do it that way. But I thought it was easier just to do this. So everything solid light blue. And then I'm going to try taking a little bit of black and mixing it with this. And it's just going to make kind of this light blue gray color, which is fine. You just don't want a lot of black because it will spread fast. So I'm just doing this towards the bottom of her mitten and just kind of blending it up just to give it a little bit of shadow. And same with this, and just kind of blending it up. Next, I'm going to rinse the brush and do her collar. So this is white. However, instead of just doing solid white, I'm going to mix little bits of light blue into that. So the little dot of blue on the brush and just blend it with the white. Creates different color variations of that white. Next, I'm going to use raw sienna to paint the cookie. So I'm not even going to rinse the brush. If you wanted to rinse the brush, that's fine. But this is just a solid layer of raw sienna, and we'll be layering on lighter colors to this. But right now I want to really focus on defining the shape of that star. We kind of lost it with all the other things that we're painting around it. If you need to redraw the star because that might help, you're welcome to do that. Also keep in mind that it's a cookie. It doesn't need to be a perfect star shape. For this dry, I'm going to grab a teeny bit of white and just kind of blend white in the center of this, but I want to leave the edges, and these are just kind of short, choppy, textured like paint strokes. I want to leave the edges of the star dark because the center part of the cookie is lighter. We create more shadowing by leaving the dark edges, leaving those edges dark. And next I'm going to do the rolling pin. So I'm not going to work anymore on the star cookie just yet. I'm going to let all that dry before adding more detail. I added a little bit of black into that brown to create a little bit more darkness in that brown. So I'm going to do the handles of the rolling pin first. Those are the dark brown. So just a dot of black into raw sienna is enough to darken it. And you're going to find with the rolling pin that it might be a little bit of challenge with the color, creating enough contrast because we're working with similar colors of the background. So you'll see when we get here, I'm going to add a little bit of white to this, and I'm making these paint strokes go this way. And so far it's pretty good as far as contrast. And then I'm going to make these paint strokes go this way, curve. That's going to give my rolling pin some shape. And titanium white on one side. So that is a very similar color to the background. I'm going to curve these this way. If we want to, we can take black and just kind of go along the edge of that rolling pin and then go back and do this. So that's going to give me a little bit more contrast with the background. I am painting my painting upside down. It's not the camera that got flipped. Sometimes I like to change my canvas in all different directions just to get in there on some harder to reach parts. And so this part of the rolling pin is really small, but it needs to be a lighter color. So that's that top piece that goes around that handle. That one is raw sienna mixed with white. Just be careful not to match your background color too closely. Then I'm going to take titanium white and just make like a fun little highlight on one side of the handle. And then maybe there's a fun kind of lighter, we already did lighter color here earlier, but adding a little bit more like a straight line. And then maybe go back with this lighter color and kind of drag it towards the left. So the left side ended up being more shadowy. Next, I'm going to paint her mouth. So I'm going to rinse my 4 round brush and I'm going to mix equal parts red and raw sienna together. I'm going to twist my brush because this is going to be a small line, and twisting the brush is really helpful for small lines. And I'm going to do those 2 curved lines. I'm going to add a little bit of water in there that helps with the flow of the paint stroke. Again, rolling that brush, make sure bristles all gathered together, and then we're going to hopefully do this in one paint stroke. Do the curved mouth line. Next, I'm going to rinse the brush and do Mars Black. You can also do this step with a paint pen, but I can still see my original lines from the drawing. And then, so that's just one curve and then one extra little eyelash curve. And do the same thing on this side. Next, I'm going to rinse, and I want to do a little highlight on her nose. So I'm going to take titanium white and just put like a little kind of curve right there, and then actually take my finger and just smear it a little bit so it's kind of more subtle. Maybe just one little curve right in the middle of that. And then I'm going to do the same thing to her cheeks. So taking the titanium white and the round brush and do like a little dot, and then take my finger and just kind of smear that out. Same thing with right here, and smear it out. Then I'm going to take my round brush and titanium white, and I'm going to do more texturing on her hair. So this is just white and not any of that gray. So I'm just going to lightly paint some hair strands, leaving a lot of that darker gray showing in between. That creates texture in her hair. So I'm going to go in that direction so it curves around the hair. If you wanted to make her hair more curly, you can do paint strokes that aren't as smooth. You can kind of do more rounded paint strokes. And then repeat the same thing on this side, around the ear, to create more texture. And then I'm going to create more texture on her hat using the titanium white. So last time we just kind of did smooth paint strokes. I'm going to go back over this and do kind of more rounded paint strokes, especially along the edging. So around here, textured, rounded paint strokes, kind of dabble the brush. Thicker layers of paint. And then when you get closer to the bottom edging, you can kind of make some of that go outside the lines. So the edging of that has a little bit of texture. And then I'm going to do the same thing to this ball part of the hat, just dabbing some more of that texture. And we did a kind of a gray layer at first, but I don't want to cover all that gray. Just add that second layer so there is a little bit of that gray still showing through. Next, I'm going to rinse the brush and grab the red to paint the berries. So these are just simple circles. And then I can use green to kind of dabble on a little bit of shadowing on the bottom part of each of those circles. And next I'm going to do more layering on the holly leaves. So actually I'm going to fill this part in right here, but then take white, so green and white on the brush. And I want to go in and just kind of fill in half of this leaf with the lighter green to kind of highlight it. And same thing with this one with that lighter green. but don't cover all of the first layer. Next, I'm going to do a little bit more detail work. I'm going to do a little bit of outlining under her face, specifically right here with just the raw sienna. I'm just going to do a very thin kind of line, and that's because the color is so close to the background color. So now we can kind of differentiate where that edge of her face is. And then the cookie. So I'm going to take my dark brown and just go along the edge of that cookie shape. The edge is the darker part, and then a little bit of black as well, right along the edge. I'm not outlining the whole thing, I'm just kind of adding that dark color to some parts of the edges. I'm going to do the same thing to the rolling pin. So with the black, just lightly outline the bottom. And I'm going to rinse the brush into the mittens. Specifically, I'm going to do polka dots on the mittens. So I'm just going to take the back of my brush handle and make little dots of white. So if you want to change the pattern on the mittens and do something else besides polka dots, it's perfectly fine. You can get creative with this. But I am just going to do simple little white dots on both of her oven mitts. Next, with the paintbrush, I'm going to lightly outline some more areas. I'm going to outline the outside part of her mitten and this part of her apron. You want to make sure your brush, you're rolling the brush when you're loading this so you can create your thin lines. You can also do this with a paint pen. And then the edge of the mitten. And then we can do the bottom edging of her collar. So loose outlining doesn't involve outlining every single thing on the painting unless you want to. It just involves outlining some things that might be helpful to make certain kind of shapes more defined. Maybe a little bit of outlining under the hat. And maybe some loose outlining around the circle part of the hat. Some more outlining on the rolling pin. And next I'm going to paint the frosting on the cookie. So with a nice clean number 4 round brush, I'm going to use the color light pink to apply the frosting. So I don't want to cover the entire cookie, leave the edging visible. And then I'm going to take titanium white and maybe just blend in a little bit extra right in the center part, so it's a little bit brighter and more textured in the center. And I'm going to go back and outline this a little bit more. Next, I'm going to paint the snowflakes on her apron. So I almost did gingerbread patterns on her apron, or I even thought about doing like a little pocket and putting a gingerbread man inside the pockets, but I decided to simplify it. So if you want to do that idea, you're definitely welcome to, if you want to change this to something else. But I'm just going to take the round brush and titanium white and paint a few large snowflakes and then some smaller ones all around her apron. So I like to do an X and a line through the X, and then I decorate each of the little lines to make it look like a snowflake. Really quick, I'm going to kind of lightly highlight the top part of the mittens and then go back to creating more snowflakes. Next, I'm going to do some touch-ups on the holly leaves and highlights on the berries. So right here, we want to, or I want to outline this and this one as well to make sure that those are on top. And then titanium white for a little bit of highlighting on the top of the berries. We can just kind of drag that color in, helps blend it a little bit. And then I'm going to use the back of my brush handle to do the sprinkles on the cookie. So this is really fun. I'm going to do this with the green and the red and the white. Then I'm going to take titanium white and dry brush up here, and that just means that I'm applying a very thin, loose layer of white just on top of the hat for some highlighting. I'll do a little bit on the holly leaves as well. Next, I want to add a little bit more shadowing on the bottom of her right mitten, oven mitt. So, and I'm going to be careful with this because of the polka dots. They're not quite dry, but I want to just do a little bit more of that kind of dark gray blue color and just kind of drag it. I'll use my finger to kind of smear it up just to give it some shadowing on the bottom. And then I'm going to do snowflakes in the background. So if you want to do something else to the background, you're welcome to, but I decided to do more snowflakes. So these are just the same kind of style as the ones that we did on the apron, except I'm not going to go into as much intricate detail with these. So most of them are just kind of simple. I'm going to dry brush a little bit of white on the edge of her shirt with the white, and then some fun highlighting on the right side of the rolling pin. And that is the conclusion of our Jolly Mrs. Claus painting. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.